Chris gets his phantom shares vested over 2 years. So every 6 months you get a quarter, right? And so as it turns out, you're like, well, if I leave, I lose that money. And if I stay and I keep, helping transition the company to the new owners, they're happy, you're happy, everybody wins.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. We're all back here today. And today I have a very interesting guest because I was reading his stuff and I'm telling you, there's more here that I can even begin to tell you about. But I want to hit the highlights. He's an entrepreneur, angel investor, business coach. And the thing I was probably most impressed with, because I can only do good to speak one, is that he's a trilingual. He can speak 3 languages, and which is impressive in my mind. But please help me welcome Henry Woodman. Welcome, Henry.
Yeah, you missed the whole shitty golfer part, but yeah.
Well, I was trying to, I saw that, but you got to be better than I am.
Oh, yeah, I don't know about that, but anyway, yeah, it's great to be here.
Well, thank you, Henry. Henry, tell us a little bit about yourself and your past life of being an entrepreneur. I want to say something. I forgot in the introduction that you have sold a business, which is one of my dreams. Well, I've been fortunate enough to do one, and I hope to do more. You've sold a business, and we'll talk about that. And now, obviously, as a good entrepreneur always does, you started another one, and we'll talk about that as well. But please go ahead.
Thank you. To your point earlier, and thank you for that intro, and I don't want to bore people, but the reality is I'm somewhat of a hedonistic / opportunistic entrepreneur, meaning I only like doing things that I enjoy doing, and then when I find opportunity, I kind of go after it. An example early on is I'm in college, of course. I don't want to study, and I'm at a laundromat near my dorm, and I'm bored out of my mind, but yet I have an addiction to Pac-Man. This is the late 70s, I might add. So, those video game machines.
Yeah.
So of course I'm thinking, man, I need a Pac-Man in this place. So I go back to the dorm. I call every laundromat in Tucson. That's where I went to college, University of Arizona. I said, you guys have video game machines? And nobody did. So I said, would you want one? I'll split the revenues with you. By the time, and I had no money, by the way, so I had to buy these things at auction. My first machine was this thing called Frogger that it was like, it's good now, but it was like used and outdated, and I bought it at an auction. And eventually people would show up to the laundromat and put quarters in because they had nothing else to do. I had a captive audience. If they didn't have quarters, there was a dollar bill changer. Anyway, so it started there, sold the business, moved to Los Angeles, and I thought, man, I am going to be a movie director, producer. And that didn't happen. So from there, I started working on travel films as what's called a PA, a production assistant, moved my way up, sound engineer, and eventually started producing travel films. After a decade of traveling, I was so tired of getting on planes, I decided I need to settle down for a little bit. Chile in Latin America went from a dictatorship to a democracy, and I thought, here's an opportunity. There's a new television network that's looking for content. I can go in and bullshit my way as a TV producer because I'm doing, these shitty travel films. And so it turns out I have a meeting with the network. They love the idea. And I start producing a game show in Chile and stayed there for a little over a year because I fell in love with a Chilean woman. Then I find, wow, I really like this first of all, I'm missing travel now. I'm like, it's like in your blood. And I see this new digital revolution, and I see this thing where you can look 360 degrees around a room. And I'm thinking, this is the coolest thing ever. Wow, this would be great for travel. So of course I set up a company called World Travel Vision to produce 360 degree virtual tours. We got the second camera ever made, this one-shot camera. And then after about a year or two of doing that, hotels and destinations would say, hey, how do we put this stuff on this new World Wide Web thingy? And I'm like, I don't know, send them a CD-ROM, which if you're old enough, you know what the hell that is. And I said, yeah, but they don't know what to do with it. There are no standards. So I said, all right, let me see what I can do to help. therein lies the next big opportunity. And there were travel agencies that would book hotels, and they had the rate and the availability, and there were no pictures, right? The internet comes around. And if you remember early on, it would say picture not available or no pictures or things. And you're like, oh, I'm never booking that dump, right?
Yep.
The problem was the different travel sites had different standards that had different codes for the room types. They had different languages. They had different sizes. So it was a bit of a mess. So we decided to go out, and after 2 decades, pretty much if you go to any travel website on the planet now in any country and you see pictures of the hotels, that generally would have come from my previous company. So we would go to the Hiltons, the Hyatts, the Wyndhams, the Accors. We'd get all the hotel groups and management companies around the world, take their images, size tag, categorize, and send everywhere. That was the company I sold a few years ago. Now we're going to go back to, okay, so how did I get here after, multiple decades? So when I moved to Los Angeles with dreams of producing and directing movies, I'm sorry, Chris, you're supposed to be asking me questions, and here I am rambling on.
This is a story this is a podcast about stories, and you're doing awesome. You can continue on.
So here I am in Los Angeles, with dreams of, producing and directing movies. Of course, that wasn't happening. And my dad, who was a writer, a travel writer, nonfiction stuff, wrote a manuscript. He didn't intend on publishing it. He had it in his garage. My sister is helping him move from his house. She reads this thing. She asked Dad, what is it? He goes, that's a love story. It's a tribute to a friend. Okay, can I read it? She does. She calls me up and she says, it was amazing. Daddy wrote a love story. And I'm like, Dad, love story. He's a pig. My dad was a lecherous, sort of sleazy kind of guy, but, good guy. Anyway, make a long story short, she sends it to me. And, eventually I read it. I couldn't put it down. I was in tears and I went, oh my God. I call my dad. I go, Dad, can I buy the rights? And he's like, sure. And I said, I don't have any money. Can I borrow $1, to pay you, make it legal, right? So I have the rights, and I said, well, it's kind of nepotistic. It's Dad's book. Let me tell a friend of mine who I knew in LA was producing a movie. And he says, Henry, I'm in the middle of a movie. Give me time. I said, don't worry, you got plenty of time. 3 days later, calls me back. He goes, this was amazing. We are meant to do this. I said, great, let's do it. Of course, here we are 40 years later. He got challenged with his production of his movie with Vestron Video. I ended up going to Chile to do game shows. We ultimately stayed in touch, and I said, one day, when I sell my company, we're going to finally do this. And that's kind of where it is now. The company was sold, and now my closing the chapter, if you will, or continuing so I don't retire with boredom, is the passion project. I just a couple of weeks ago launched the book. It's called The Reincarnation of Marie. And it's a paranormal romance with historical fiction. And I love the idea so much that the book is really the springboard that leads to the TV series, which is a far deeper dive into the past lives of these people. And the series essentially asks basic questions. Why are we here? Are there such things as soulmates? Does this quantum field or time travel or any of this stuff, is this actually real, or are we just so naive we don't really know what's going on, which we don't, but it begs those questions.
Now, you said 40 years later, right?
Yeah.
Oh, is your father with us today? Okay.
My dad wrote it 40 years ago. He passed 14 years ago, so he'll never be able to see this.
Is Marie a real name?
Yes.
Okay. And is she living?
No. So
okay.
Back in the late 1800s, there was a woman called Marie Barshkerseff, and she died at 24. She knew she was dying of tuberculosis. She wrote a journal for 10 years from 14 to 24. And she wrote about things that, at the time, women just did not talk about. Masturbation and sexuality and, virginity, and you don't talk about that,
Right.
So when 2 years after she passed, the book was published, it became an international bestseller, kind of the Lady Gaga of her time, if you will. 70 years later, in the book that was written. This, I got a copy there, but the reincarnation of Marie, essentially a guy 70 years later reads the journal. He falls in love with the written word, if you will, with her because of her passion and her writing and the things she felt. And then he starts to think, oh my, this is not good. I have fallen in love with a dead woman. This is not good. Eventually, and I won't give you all the, the story, but eventually he finds her reincarnation. And that's kind of the gestation, is like he first realizes, you know what, this is not right. I can't have a relationship with a dead woman. This is crazy. He leaves Paris. He comes back for a recital for his, his sister invited him, and he finds the woman reincarnated. She says and speaks and dresses and knows pretty much all. So he's convinced it's the reincarnation of Marie. And so we in the series go decide, who in our current lives, who are we, and who in our past lives have had an effect, whether it's, karma we're paying for or we're getting rewarded for, or sins of the father, but all the interconnectedness of past lives and what they mean to our current life is the big question there.
Sure. Well, thank you. I've got a couple of questions that are evolving from that conversation right there. And I've got an upcoming episode about financing and bootstrapping and so forth. So all these things you've talked about, obviously the dollar, I assume you come up with the dollar to get to your dad, but what do I want to say? How did you fund some of this stuff? I mean, obviously I'm assuming now you had the funds, but before,
Right.
when you were thinking about, how'd you do that?
So, first on, the used machine at an auction in arcade games, that was my college fund. It was only a couple $100, but that was pretty much the extent of my life. So I gambled that one.
But that was $100 back when the $100 was $100.
Yeah, exactly. So then, once that started showing promise, I got 2, and then I got 4. And what I would do is I would rotate them around, because, you get a laundromat and you play a game and you're like, oh, this game sucks. Then you come back a couple of weeks later and there's a new game and you're like, oh, they figured it out, those people. Yeah, great. So same thing with all of the other stuff. I always tell people, if I were smart, I would have raised money. I didn't know how to raise money. And if I would have raised money, I probably would have screwed it up. I would have bought things that I didn't need and spent money that I shouldn't have and hired people that didn't fit the vision. And I would have probably gone bankrupt. True story. I believe that. So what I did was I went out and I built it on my own. Now, that's not always the case with businesses, because some of them are very capital intensive. But, being a software tech company, it doesn't require a lot of capital infusion except for developers. But at the end of the day, when you look at what I was doing early on, I mean, I had a house and I had a second mortgage on the house, sort of a line of credit, if you will. And when we needed money to pay employees, first of all, I was the last guy to get paid, but when employees got paid, I had to take it out of the line of credit. So, I often walked around telling them, if this job doesn't work out, I'll be asking you if you want fries with that burger. That was my backup plan.
I was in a group the other day, and thank the Lord I'm not in this case, but I could see I guess I used to be. The mentor, someone asked, she goes, I always tell people if they're needing cash, she goes, go get a job. She goes, you don't want to hear that, but basically get the job to get you through and take that money, your excess money, and put it into your business.
Yeah.
And, that's sometimes what has to happen. You got to live, but if you still have a dream, you still want to move forward.
Whatever you think you're going to need, double it. And then know that a lot of people have these great ideas, which I don't blame them for that, but they think that I build it and they will come, right? And the hardest thing for most businesses is to get the clients to know, the marketing aspect is if you truly are solving a problem and you truly have a good product, right? How do you let the Chris's and the Henrys of the world know it exists? And therein lies the rub.
Because if they don't know it, they don't know to look for it. They don't, yeah. the Rich Dad Poor Dad book I love referring back to. It talks about working for free, and that's basically what you're doing. You're the last to get fed, basically.
That's right.
But that's okay sometimes. I could use a few pounds shed, but it we know that your dream is, I don't say more hungry than you. You're, if it's a real dream, I mean, if you really believe in your passion to do whatever it is, and whether it's making money or moving forward, helping somebody, and that's obviously the best part of the business. But if you really believe in it, the hunger doesn't. It's a hunger inside, not in your belly. So
yeah. So I got to tell you, Chris, when people say follow your passion,
yeah,
and here I am going, I don't even fucking know what my passion is. I mean, I know what I like to do. I know what I find joy in. I don't know if it's my passion, if you will. And
sure.
When I said early on, I'm an opportunistic hedonist, type.
Right.
It's because early on, I wanted to play video games. That was selfish of me. Maybe other people are like me, right? When I wanted to produce travel films, it's because I like the film business, the creativity, and I wanted to travel, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was doing game shows in Chile because it was an opportunity. I was also, single and loved Latin women, right? I married a Venezuelan. And the last one, which was more the opportunity, because the last thing I ever thought I wanted to do was actually run a business.
Mm-hmm.
That's the one that made the money. And while I was running the business and I had no idea what I was doing, I went back and I got my MBA. I read a book that changed the strategy, if you will, to understand what all of this meant.
Mm-hmm.
And then I started to focus on those fundamentals. What's the vision? What's the culture? What's this, document everything, and how do we continually improve, like Kaizen? And at the end of the day, when people talk about, I've got this great idea. Yeah, but 90% of small businesses fail. Ooh, that's a tough one. You don't think that when you're starting a business, right? But you have to understand what it is that makes it different, that you might be one of those 10%. And that's a tough one. That requires dedication. That requires a lot of mental discipline. I use the analogy, the difference between drowning and swimming, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're drowning, you're flailing your arms and legs around and you're mentally and physically exhausted. You're panicking. When you're swimming or treading water, less energy, calmer mind. It takes a matter of time to learn how to swim. You don't just go in and go, hey, just do this, right? After time, errors will be made, right? You're going to learn to calm your mind, to calm your body, if you will, to swim. But it's the same thing with business. You don't just go in and go, I know what the fuck I'm doing. No, you don't. Nobody does. Even with the people that are sitting there going, I know everything. No, because everything's different. And now it's changing every day with AI and the various ways you can social media market and digital marketing. And oh my God, I don't know how they do it. Really, it's tough.
Oh, I had a guest. I'm gonna divert real quick. Had a guest the other day, Ashley Gross, and that's her specialty is AI. And she was like, and I have an idea about AI, but I had a perception, but I didn't see the background. She showed me the background of it. It's like, oh my gosh. And it's exciting and scary sometimes at the same time. But I mean, I'm thinking about the movie Terminator. So I keep referring back to, it's like, yeah, I was like, woo. Anyway.
I mean, if you're running a small business and you're not trying or figuring out how to implement AI today, your competitors are, and you're going to lose. You're going to lose. As an opportunity now, if I were younger and I were hungry, I would probably look at something as an AI concierge or consultant, because there are gazillions of small businesses that are like, look, I have these platforms. I don't know how I can integrate AI. I don't know what AI to use, because there's a boatload of them, to say, look, pay me like a SaaS model, software as a service.
Sure.
I'll implement and integrate and I'll maintain. And this is the important part, is as things evolve, because they are every 5 minutes, and things change, maybe a couple of months from now, that might not be the best application that we've connected your systems to. There may be a more improved version or one that's specifically for your vertical. And I think that is something that small businesses are really going to need, because many of them don't even know how to tackle AI.
And some of them don't know why they need to even incorporate it. And that's a whole different
It's a fear
episode, I guess.
We're drowning. Absolutely.
Well, so today you're an angel investor, right?
Oh God, yes.
All right. So I'm going to ask twofold questions. What do you look for in a business worthy of investing in?
Oh, that's easy. Yeah,
Okay.
it's fairly simple, because first of all, I need to know a little bit about the space. So, but I like business to business, B2B, enterprise. Don't go after direct to client, because man, um, SaaS models, because I like the recurring revenue element of it.
Mm-hmm.
I like that they're profitable. You know, when somebody comes and go, I've got this great idea and I'm worth $20 million. No, you're not, you know, but they think they are. And not in Silicon Valley, ironically, because I think that the idea that I'm in Silicon Valley and look, my neighbor and that guy and this guy, they went out and they got a valuation, some ridiculous money. Obviously, it's coming a little bit back down to earth, but I think the valuations are more in line with realism when you're not in Silicon Valley. So B2B, enterprise, not in Silicon Valley, profitable, and SaaS. Now, I've made a couple of exceptions because I like things. You know, like I've done a fintech company that I knew the guys from my hospitality days. You know, I've done other companies in the eco field because I like that. And, you know, one drone company that drops seeds for planting forests. So, you know, it doesn't, you know, I think it helps the planet.
Sure. Tell me a story about one that, without going into, I guess, letting anything out of the bag if you have a non-disclosure or something like that. But tell me one that you think's going to really, that you thought, well, this is a good one. I'm going to help these guys.
Yeah, I'm not very good at that, to be honest with you. I can tell you that the things that are not sexy sounding, like legit SaaS companies, are the ones that are going to knock it out of the park, in my opinion. Because how many times do you see, you know, companies like this security company that Google is buying for $23 billion? Like, who? What? Never heard of them, right?
Yeah, right.
So the point I'm trying to make really is there are companies that are doing the behind the scenes stuff that are not in the front line, you know, like Airbnb. Yeah, but are there systems behind doing things with Airbnb that are, you know, doing really well? Probably, right?
Yeah.
There are, you know, ships traveling around the world doing freight forwarding, and there's computers that track this type of stuff and keep tabs of the, you know, the containers and things. That's not sexy at all, but that is a company that's doing
But
well.
they make money.
They make money, right? And therein lies the thing. You know, if you said, you know, you sold a tech company, I'm like, yeah, I could not write a line of code if you put a gun to my head. Bless you, Chris. And so you put a gun in my head, I wouldn't write a line of code. But, you know, if you surround yourself with good people and you say, here's what we're focused on, and you share in the, you know, the profits if you're so lucky, I think you get a good team. And that's really probably one of the most important things.
Ooh, I love talking about teams. We'll come back to that. There's something you mentioned earlier. You mentioned a book, but you didn't mention the title.
Oh, yeah.
What's the book that you recommend that for you put it back in perspective?
Okay. The book
that was important too. But
yeah. Sorry, I put it there so you can see the title, but the book is called The Reincarnation of Marie. And the reality is, if you want to go see what's going on with the TV series and options where to buy it, obviously it's on Amazon and Barnes and Nobles and in different places. It's also mariethestory.com. So if you go to mariethestory.com, you'll see sort of a little overview of the author, which is my dad, the Anemoia Media portion, which is the production that we're setting up to build it. And then some links to the various, you know, accolades that we're getting. I mean, it's a relatively new podcast. I mean, not podcast. It's a relatively new venture with the book and the development of the TV series.
Well, you're not getting off that easy, because the book I'm talking about is the one that you read that changed
Oh,
your,
oh,
yeah.
you should have stopped me. Yeah,
That's
this is
okay.
really,
We're on a roll, and
yeah,
your
sorry.
current book is very important as well because I was quite intrigued when you said paranormal. That's something I like to watch a lot, and that intrigued me. But no, I'm referring to the book that put it in perspective for you.
By the way, that book was so important and it changed my business trajectory. I used the author's full name as the backdoor password to my technology. I told him that too one day, and he loved it. The book is called Traction, and it's by Gino Wickman. And traction essentially, for lack of a better term, says get a grip on your business. And early on in the business, when people would say, "Oh, you need to hire the best people," and I'm like, dude, I can't even pay myself, much less pay people. I can't afford those best people, right? You need to, work on your culture. What's that mean, right? You need to have a vision. I'm like, how do you do that? What is that? I had no idea, right? Being a hedonist, buying a game or producing a television show is not at all like running a business, right? An ongoing concern, if you will. Even productions, beginning, middle, and an end. This is an ongoing concern. So Traction was my Bible. I bought I booked for every employee. We weren't big at the time that I started it. And I said, read this book. We're going to get together in a month. We're going to put together all of these elements. This is our Bible. We even developed software in order to track our KPIs, the key performance indicators for the weekly meetings. And then we had, much like a tech company, we had our daily huddle. What are 3 things you did yesterday, 3 things you're going to do today? Because we wanted to keep the momentum going. But for me, with the exception of marketing, Traction is a small business Bible. I love it. You're welcome, Gino.
You also mentioned something which I know what it is because I've used it before, Kaizen. Can
Oh, yeah.
you, how do you, well, A, what is it? Or for my listeners, what is it? If you haven't heard of it, and how do you use it or have used it?
Sure. So when I went back to get my MBA, one of the classes was lean management. And lean, which is the Toyota way, if you will, has a term called Kaizen, which is, continually improving, right? So I look at, I put all the information. I'm like, all right, how do we get from here to here, right? These are the number of steps. And is there anything in there that we don't need to do? It's called muda or waste. Yeah, you know what? Why are we doing this? Get rid of it. And this was a conversation we'd have regularly. Can we make it more efficient? Can we make it less friction for clients to make changes, to update, to add, to see? So the Kaizen is continually improving, not just for the client because they're really the boss, but for the internal departments as well, right? So Kaizen is just continually improving.
Awesome. We use Kaizen a lot, but you're talking about the boss. I always talked about the fact that you got internal customers and internal customers, external and internal customers, and that you got to take care of them both differently. But at the end of the day, if you're wanting to grow your team, as we talked about earlier, you got to treat everybody like you want to be treated like a customer, and everybody has a product or whatever it is, and that product is going to affect your other customer. I mean, it's like an ongoing thing. So you find ways, like you said, to improve. And that's awesome. And I haven't heard that word in a long time, and
I'm glad I killed that memory.
Yeah, the Toyota way. I read that book. That's why it got me going, and we implemented a lot of that stuff. So those who we won't go down that path, but those who are interested, just search Toyota and the Toyota way, and that'll tell you a lot right there. So
there's a lot of those TQMs and various efficiency tools. It in large part, it depends as well on the type of business you're in, but everybody could always use a form of, let's see what we're doing and what we can do to make it faster, simpler, cheaper sometimes, right? But if somebody comes into the company and you say, okay, here are the 5 steps we need in order to accomplish this goal, they go, wow, why are you doing that? I could do it in 3. Really? Well, let's do it in 3. Change the SOP. Let's get leaner.
I'm not opposed to ideas.
Yeah.
And oh, I will tell. Let me tell this story real quick. I was thinking about this the other day. I'm not even sure why, but we were talking about innovations and suggestions. And sometimes a manager, like, let's say you're doing Kaizen, and you got somebody, and it's a lot easier with a smaller group, I think. And the more people you have, we had like 180 at the time, and some people would come up with ideas. And I was all about giving me ideas because that's important. But as a manager, you might think, well, I don't have time. I got all this other stuff. So there's two ways of doing that, and kind of it pushes, it empowers your people, and you say, hey, that's a great idea. Go test it. And what I found was if those who really believed in it and were good employees, as far as being part of it, they go test it. But you also find those who, I don't know why they do it. Maybe they feel important, but people will give suggestions like, you need to do this. Like, no, I don't have time to do that, but I'm willing to listen to your idea. If you can prove it, we're going to make it happen.
That's right.
And you have those who believe in it and will move forward, and those who, I don't know, like maybe toot their own horn type thing. And sometimes tooting your own horn is fine. It's probably maybe a good idea. But if you don't have time, keep it track of it. And then when you have a moment, get back to it. Kind of
Yeah.
like your book idea, 40 years later, you might get back to it.
Yeah. It was on the back shelf. It's got, let me dust off the cobwebs. There are also those people that say, well, this is the way we always did it, or this is how we always do it.
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah.
The world's changing every minute, right?
I had a lady that used to say that. I look at her and she goes, I know. That's how it's always been done. It's like, yeah,
Yeah,
I don't make it right just because of that's the way it's been
that's
done.
right. Yeah, good. We shouldn't use the we more, right?
Absolutely. I wrote down a note here. You were doing all this traveling. How'd that affect your family?
Well, early on in my 20s, when I was producing travel films, I didn't really have a family. I was, traveling and, be slutty in different places. So yeah, that didn't affect my family at all.
Because when you moved to Chile, you weren't married, right?
I was not married.
Yeah.
No. And when I lived there, I actually was dating a Chilean woman. And so that was easy, right? So I got married in my sort of midlife, if you will. So that didn't affect anything. And it's never really affected, even with my former company in the hospitality space, I wouldn't do a lot of traveling. I mean, when you look at the big major companies that manage hotels, there's probably less than 100 on planet Earth. And if you can't meet with or talk to 100 companies at trade shows, conferences, or on the calls, what's the point, right? That was my goal. So I would travel to trade shows and conferences, and that was pretty much the extent of my travels. I did it regularly, but not like, 9 months out of the year. I was not in one place more than a week or something.
Did your team travel?
Some of them, yeah. Yeah.
As you brought up your team, were they a family, or how did you manage those people?
Lots of beatings and whippings would regularly, no.
Well, those sometimes are effective, but
Yeah. What's funny is, when you read through and you understand what culture is and you understand what you're trying to do, what I did early on was, when I couldn't afford some of the better employees, I would offer them what's called phantom stock, right? And phantom stock simply says, listen, you own a percentage of the company, but you're only going to profit if and when we sell the company, right? Now, if we make profit every year, you don't have to worry about the tax burden, because as a shareholder, you do, right? You'll get your K1s. And if we sell the company, you make a percentage. There's one disadvantage to that, and that is it's paid as ordinary income as opposed to capital gain. So it's a different tax structure. But the reality is, Chris, I like what you're doing. I know you deserve to get more money. My goal ultimately is to sell the company, and I want to enrich all of us. Let me give you some phantom stock shares of the company. Okay. Now, if you leave on your own accord, you lose those phantom stocks. Not like, you leave and 2 years later I sell the company, you make money. Not going to happen. Right? If, however, you happen to die and something happens, I'll give that phantom stock to your, wife or kids or whoever you've got.
Sure.
And it's also a vesting period. Two things happen. One, you vest to get the number of shares, right? So if it's 2 years, let's say, I plan on selling the company in like 5 years. That's the goal. So 5 years from now, you'll have the stock, but it vests in 2 years. Somebody comes along and cuts a check next week, you only get one portion of it. But on the other side, when the company buys and say, listen, I really like that Chris guy. I don't want him to leave with, a little bit of cash that we're going to give him. Chris gets his phantom shares vested over 2 years. So every 6 months you get a quarter, right? And so as it turns out, you're like, well, if I leave, I lose that money. And if I stay and I keep, helping transition the company to the new owners, they're happy, you're happy, everybody wins.
I'm so glad I asked that question because I have a SaaS business and we're growing, and I have virtual assistants who I want to take care of, and they're in the Philippines, and we have, and I know I'm going to have some people here local in the States that I might not be able to afford completely, but if I get buy-in, and like you said, and they truly believe, and whether it be phantom stock or something, that's an awesome answer. I appreciate that insight.
Happy to help. Yeah.
And for our listeners, if you're building your team, in which we highly recommend, that's a way to help get some good.
And I'll add to that, Chris.
Yeah.
Don't when you hire somebody and you're like, look, I just hired Chris. I think he's great. Let me give him phantom stock right now. You know Chris well enough. Give him a year or two. And then when Chris is like a rock star and you're like, Chris, I know you deserve a lot more money. And by the way, with Traction, we would have weekly meetings that anybody could go to and you could see the numbers every single week. So we weren't trying to hide anything. So say, listen, you know what the numbers are. We're not making a huge amount of money, but I need to pay you more. And in lieu of that, I want to give you this incentive, a bigger check in the end, because, this is not a legacy company. I don't plan to keep it. And therein, after you've been there a while and you know their value and their worth and that they're a team player and they see the vision, then I would offer the phantom stock.
Actually, that brings up another question. So I read the book about Southwest Airlines.
Oh, yeah.
Sharing financials with your people, being open. And there was my boss at the time, he was very particular about not showing numbers. So I said, okay, how can I make a bigger picture but still get through because not everybody wants to know the nitty down to I spent $10 at whatever. So we looked at the income sheet and we kind of broke it down and gave big pictures that everybody could follow along, in materials, labor, overhead, and I'm making it up, but basically those three things are going to affect your bottom line. Here's your bottom line where we're at and so forth. So my question to you is, how in depth did you go on your track when you were doing Traction, your daily meetings, or weekly, excuse me, how in depth did you get on your financials?
Yeah. Well, first of all, nobody in the company really had insight into who's getting paid what. That's for obvious reasons. I wouldn't recommend that at all.
And we did the same thing. Here's your labor total. And yeah.
Right. So basically you could use a couple of things, exact numbers, like, we made, $1.2 million. We spent 1.1 or whatever. We made $100,000. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But you can also use ratios. We've improved, over the last quarter X, and you can say, listen, last year, the entire company made X amount of money and we've grown by 13%, right? And we're on track and stuff. So you can see trends. You can also see the same thing with expenditures, right? We have capital expenses, obviously. And what are they? Are we going over? Are we going under? Where do we need to save? Because the hardest thing to do is to look at your cash flow and make sure you're not spending more money than you're making. That's so difficult. It's a death trap. I know it's hard. And I always get frustrated when I look at companies and they just spend to grow and get numbers. And like, that's 10 years ago when we were, back in the .com, just grow for growth's sake. Now you got to show money. You got to show you're making money. You got to show you can make a profit.
Did you all have a budget?
Yeah, well, I had a budget and I pulled numbers out of my ass and,
Yeah.
I did all this wonderful stuff. And I used to, early on, I used to love playing with the spreadsheet and fantasizing about how much, and if we get these many customers, we do this. And next thing you know, I'm a gazillionaire. And, you know, those weren't really that real, which is the other thing that traction does for you.
Mm-hmm.
So you look at the long term, what's the plan in 1 year? Where do you want to be? Give me some specific KPIs. And then what's the plan in 3 years? And then tell me how you're getting there, right? So if we said, listen, I need to be at X millions of dollars. Okay, good. That's the goal. And I need to be so much profit. Okay, good. I got 37. We were like 60% profit. It was great. But I want to be at 30% profit. Okay, how do I get to that profit? And then you'd have to say, here are the employees, here's what they're getting paid, here's the overhead expenses, here's what they, the G&A, all of that stuff. And then you would have a much clearer picture of that vision. You would paint the picture, if you will. You wouldn't just say, we'd be like, $27 million in year 3. Okay, how do you get to that? How many clients, how much revenue does that include with respect to, profits? And all of that stuff needs to be thought through. And that thought process in and of itself also helps grow and scale the business.
Sure. Before I ask this question, I want to get understand. As an angel investor, are you part of a group or are you an individual angel investor?
Both. Sometimes I'm a limited partner. Other times I am individual, knowing, the actual CEO and they're raising friends and family and stuff like that.
Sure. Okay. So here's my question then. How involved do you get with the budget of the, not involved, when somebody comes to you, I'm assuming they're bringing the budget with them, right? So can you go through that concept of how that's evaluated?
Yeah, as an LP, you really don't have a lot of say. As a limited partner, it's you just, you like the idea, you think the team is good from what little you know, or the concept, and you just hope and pray, right? The more involved you get, it depends on where you think their value is. One that I literally invested this year because I knew the guy for many years and I knew the team and I knew the opportunity. It's either a home run or it's a dud. So I'll lose all the money or I'll do well. The budget was, and I told the guy, I said, listen, try not to raise money. I mean, venture capital or PE if you can, because you've got golden handcuffs, you're beholden to other people's expectations. There's a lot more headache. You may not sleep well at night. If you can bootstrap, do it. You'll be happier at the end. But at the end, the budget in my opinion, is less of an importance unless you can see gross misrepresentations of where they're going to spend money. The pro forma and what they think they're going to make. I don't take a lot of belief in that, but what's going on today? Are you making money today or are you spending more than you're making, right? And then where are you spending it? Don't have an extravagant lifestyle and spend, and you're paying yourself a ridiculous amount of money for a startup. Don't do that, right? That loses credibility in my opinion. So I don't have exact numbers, but I think
that's okay. I mean,
it's always the, within reason thing. You know what I mean?
Sure. Well, I was getting ready to wrap this up, but now you're done asking the question that some people, especially if they're starting out as a business entrepreneur, and since we're talking about Titans, explain the difference between a VC and an angel investor. And I know the difference, but it's a VC stands for
venture capitalist,
and the angel investor. How do they differentiate?
Well, generally an angel investor comes in sooner. They're riskier. I look at it like one person, or in some cases, like I'm in South Florida and there are angel groups here that will get together and, high net worth people and say, look, we like this company. There is a guy who's been in that field who will go and do a little bit of vetting and say, you know what? Yeah, I can see the opportunity. And listen, I trust Chris. I'm gonna pool my money with Chris, right? I've done that with a couple of them. One just went bust, so you never know. But
Sure.
I think a VC is after the fact, or that they've determined they're a little more traction oriented. And an angel, in my opinion, an angel is a lot easier to deal with because the VCs have different expectations. They're serious people, whereas angels are like, listen, I hope you make me some money. if you go bust, it's not going to affect my life. It'll affect your life. Like one of the conversations I had was like, listen, if you lose, your life is ruined. If you lose, I just go on my merry little way. You know, so it's a ping. So what, right? And at the end of the day, I've slowed down on my angel investing simply because the market is kind of like, crazy. And it drives me absolutely nuts every year when I do taxes and I get more than 40K ones in different times and I can never get it right. And people defer shit. And I'm like, ugh. Yeah, the technical tax thing, why didn't I just put it aside, not even worry about it, right? It's just another headache.
Well, this is wrapping up. Then I have
You have a question.
I have more questions. Absolutely. The your limited partner, meaning that obviously you're a limited partner, but if you're not a limited partner, and I know you're a business coach, and we can talk about how that happens later, but are you giving as a active partner, I guess, not necessarily limited or full partner? Are you helping those people, coaching them like a mentorship?
Sometimes as an advisor or sometimes on the board. And obviously the board has some input into decisions and long-term things. So as a board member, yeah. As an advisor, yeah, usually upon request. I don't want to get in unless somebody asks me and says, all right, Henry, we have a challenge with X, Y, or Z. Can you help? And I'll be honest, whether I can or I can't. But I don't want to go in and say, hey, listen, that guy's an idiot. I don't even know that guy, or that strategy's an idiot. The one thing I do say is I know when you're young and starting out, you're a two-bit whore for nickels. Anybody with a nickel, I'll take it. I need the money. I get that. Say yes to everything. But as you grow, you need to learn to say no, right? Because if you're going to be the best at one thing, or you're going to focus on the profits in one area, you're going to have to focus and say no to other things that are distracting and take your, HR, your people and your technology and stuff away from what you can do really well.
So if I was sick of being a two-bit whore and was looking for a business coach, how would I get a hold of you?
You call other two-bit horse. No, I don't do a lot of that, but you're more than welcome to reach out on LinkedIn. It's Henry Woodman on LinkedIn. I don't have a formal setting. I usually get referrals from people. I am part of EO, the Entrepreneurs Organization, and I'm also on the chairman of the board of another group, Strategic Forum. So there's a lot of C-level guys and businesses that are usually saying, look, help me out. 9 out of 10 times, I'm like, oh, I'm happy to help. I'm not going to charge you anything because they're a friend. But if there's somebody that wants to do something more formal, let's figure out the strategy. And I would highly recommend, especially small businesses, go out and buy traction and understand how you can implement it into your business. I had a company that I was coaching a couple of years ago, and she reached out to me and she goes, Henry, since I implemented traction, we have tripled our revenue. And that's in 2 years, right? And she says, we've just standardized and it's amazing how simplified we got it. Because people, if you don't know, you're spending a lot of time learning and constantly, hey, how did we do it before? You mean you didn't document it? You mean we don't have a standard procedure? We don't have an SOP? Yeah, do it. Yeah. What are we going for? What's our vision? Tell me every single day. Here's why we're here. Here's what we're doing, why we're doing it.
Awesome. Thank you for that guidance. And before we go, where can I find this paranormal series of TV? Is it like a streaming or is it on a particular?
No.
Where can I find it?
Well, the information will be on the website mariethestory.com, because the book is being sold there. The book is the catalyst, if you will. It's the springboard. So once the book gains a little bit of traction, we then have what's called a pitch deck. The pitch deck goes to showrunners and they go, yeah, I like it.
Okay.
Yeah. I am into that concept. We put together what's called a Bible, which is the showrunner, the director, the cast, the budget. You go to a streamer and you say, okay, here's the package wrapped up in a bow. They say yes or no. If they say yes, then you got the whole budget thing and you get greenlit, right? It's a different world than it was back when I thought I was going to do this. And, it was a closed loop. Now any decent person with an iPhone and a computer can do a decent movie. Now, this is a little bit more intricate, but you
Sure.
get the concept. Yeah. So,
So-
marinastory.com.
So you take that package for people who want to do their own movies. Would you take that package and take like to Netflix and Amazon and whoever else, Hulu and all those other guys out there, and
You
then
would,
pitch it to them?
yeah, but if you're not known in the industry, nobody's going to take it. So that's why you say, okay, who in the world does paranormal romance, historical fiction type genres?
Right.
And they're called showrunners, producers, but they're more, involved with the day-to-day and writing and stuff like that. And you say,
I got you.
Chris has done a similar type thing, and he knows people at Amazon and Netflix because he's got a track record. So you go to
Sure.
Chris, and Chris says, "Oh yeah, right up my alley, like it." Once you attach Chris gets you in that door.
Gotcha. Well, that's cool. All right. So Henry,
Unless
thank you.
you're an agent, and of course, agents, I don't. Yeah, that's the old school. Sorry.
I hear you. Well, the internet and the worldwide, that's really changed a lot of things, hasn't it? So
Yeah.
thank you, Henry, very much. Been a pleasure. Thank you for being a Titan and truly a Titan's tale today.
Thank you, Chris. Have a great day, everybody.
You too.